Jason Colby, personal wealth $1.2 billion. Controlling interest in Colby Enterprises, international headquarters Los Angeles, California, with offices in New York, Houston, London, Paris, Lagos, Nigeria, Tokyo, Singapore, Caracas, and Buenos Aires. Total gross assets estimated to be slightly more than $42 billion.
The wealth that was on show in the course of the evening's entertainment was somewhat reflective of the way America was living high on the hog at the time.
I used to think that what the audience of Colbys ideally was someone with a great big bag of crisps or chips or whatever you call them, in their slippers, feet up, watching the miseries of the rich.
Here's the thing. Here's why I think Aaron was so successful. It was junk food for the mind.
People loved to watch us because it was still the decade of possibility that people could get rich.
People like to see rich people with bigger problems than they have. They like to come back and not have to think, just watch. Just enjoy the chemistry and the characters and the outrageousness of the story. And if they can get engaged and escape for an hour, you succeed. My desire was to make a living as an actor. At the time, I was in New York City, and I believe there were maybe 8 soap operas. And it seemed that most actors got gigs on soaps. It wasn't a matter of choice, it was a matter of a good-paying job. And it allowed you to do theater at night. And I just happened to be on the soap at the time. The soap was Search for Tomorrow. The soap's end, and after 2.5 years, I was out of a job. And what brought me to California was ABC developed a nationwide talent search. My agent told me to go in and meet with this casting director, and I thought, oh my goodness, they're going to see every actor in town. I have 1,000,001 shot. So we got out here and we started auditioning, and I think my second audition was for Dynasty, or Oil at the time. And I auditioned for the role of Steven, and I didn't get the role, but my agent said, they've given you the role of Jeff. So immediately I went through the script and I started looking for Jeff, and I thought, my goodness, where is he? Where the heck is this guy? And I found 2 little scenes. I thought, well, that's good. He was a young Republican, I think it said, and that was it. So I thought, okay, I'm a young Republican. That's what I'm going to play. Very eager, very honest, very stalwart, and, Jeff Colby. But that was it, and the rest was up to me. I was scheduled, I think, for 6 shows out of the first 13, and I ended up doing 10 of the first 13, or 11. And my character was a work in progress. Pamela Sue Martin was a little devil, and I was very straight-laced. And they saw this dynamic there. And over the years, they worked that dynamic of kind of the good guy, and had a lot of moral morality, and just a really nice guy. And she was a devil. And my character progressed through the years, and it was always a work in progress with Jeff. One of her favorite scenes was when she got me to smoke pot for the first time.
I had got about as far as I could commercially in England. The film industry was dead, and I'd done a series called Connie, and that meant that I was top of the pops on Sunday nights, which was the big night, on English television. And I realized I couldn't bring up 2 children single-handed with the sort of money that the National Theatre and Royal Shakespeare paid me. So it was just, yes, I'm having it. Very much like Joan did when she got Alexis. When Sable came along, it was mine.
Since when doesn't Jason Colby have control over anything?
Honey, I've got my reasons. Now, just stay away from her on this, please.
I was asked to go up to London. It was my first day off in 3 years. I'd finished Connie. And I was asked to go and audition for this thing.
To the future, then.
Shame on you two. Imagine having a party and forgetting to invite me.
I went into the place and I thought, what's that smell? What is that? It smells like an abattoir in here. It's sweat and nerves and, oh, this is important. Actresses have been sweating in here. And I thought, I better pull myself together. Now, I hadn't got a clue what the script was. I quickly just glimpsed at some lines that they gave me because mine had been whisked away by the wind. And I just thought, okay, eat it, go for it. Just get this.
My sister's about to say I do when the groom's dead brother, coincidentally the bride's ex-husband, returns from the dead. No wonder you fainted. I'd have shriveled up with embarrassment.
A sort of wickedness came up in me, that it doesn't matter what the lines are. Just, I was going to say something naughty, just make love to that camera.
I will do anything to protect my son. Anything.
And the next thing I knew was, providing the meeting with Aaron Spelling goes well, you have this part. And suddenly I was wading across his carpet. I mean, it was the land of shag, right? Wading. So my wonderful silky walk was actually sort of held up by thick carpet, and there I was in front of this huge desk with this little man at the other side of it, and he said, "Oh, you're younger than I thought you'd be," and I said, "But very experienced." And he picked up this great big white telephone, and just like they do in Hollywood, he said, "I'm sending her to wardrobe." And that was it. I loved dressing up for Sable. I was given the great privilege that Nola Miller, who, because I didn't change shape, I mean, his other clients like Elizabeth Taylor used to go, fat and thin and fat and thin. He saw that I didn't. And he said, "Okay, I can see that you stay the same shape, so I'm going to make you a form. So after we've had the first talk about what you're going to wear, I can get it made, and you just need to do a final fitting." And I said, "Cool, thanks," because, the standing there with pins is... But that man used to, in the number of times I have seen him on his hands and knees pinning a hem at 6 o'clock in the morning. I mean, he was an artisan as well as an artist, and I loved wearing his clothes. He was doing the show, but I had one Nola Miller at least every episode, as indeed I would, as indeed I should.
Yes, wardrobe was important. Jeff always had a suit on. Jeff was always very conservative, and we were dressed to the nines.
The only downside of the whole of Colbys was having at least one, if not 5, new pairs of shoes every week. Just such a pain to wear in. It was true glamour. My jewellery box was as tall as I am, and wider than I would ever want to be.
Oh, well, thank you, Henderson, but that will have to wait. There's something I have to attend to first.
I think we were going into our 4th season out of Dynasty, and the show, I believe, was #1 that year in network. And at the time, that's huge, to be #1 with 3 networks, big numbers. And my agent called me and said they want to spin you off into your own show, you and Pamela. I said, "Really?" And they're going to call it the Colbys. I said, oh my goodness, my own show, wow.
We were starting on the set of Dynasty. And I do believe that I was meant to be only for 6 months, I was told, because really what was going to happen was that Catherine Ross was going to take my husband. But once I'd got my little fists in that part, I think they thought, I don't think anybody's going to take her husband away from her without a lot of kicking and screaming, and we want to see the kicking and screaming. And there it was.
Sable has invited me to lunch.
Lunch with your sister? I hope you're not the meal.
Sable as a character was a feast.
What was happening with Jeff and Pamela Sue Martin's character Fallon was we were like the younger generation of Blake and Linda, or Blake and Alexis. And there was a tremendous chemistry between the two of us, which just exploded off the screen. And the producers in the network recognized that and wanted to expand on that and expand the brand.
But I couldn't help think all the way out here, I hope we're doing the right thing.
Well, it's worth a try.
I was up for it. Unfortunately, Pamela was not up for it. Pamela needed off the show. And I asked her, I said, I remember I was out in Hidden Valley with her shooting on Dynasty, and she said, I just can't take this anymore. I can't take it. And I said, Pam, please just stay on the show. If you have to, hit me, do whatever you need to do, but stay on the show. She left. The show was shelved. And I thought that was it.
I suppose really it was John who took us all into prime time, and they assembled an amazing powerhouse cast around him.
2 years later, I got a call from Doug Kramer, one of the producers with Aaron, called me into his office and said, we're going to do the Colbys.
Dynasty 2. I was a little leery of being in the sequel to anything, having been in the sequel to Grease, the biggest hit musical of all time. And we didn't exactly follow up on that smashing success.
Now, we hadn't had a Fallon for 2 years. And I asked him, I said, well, what about Pamela Sue? Is she coming back? He said, no, but we're hiring a new actress to play Fallon. He said, are you interested? I said, yeah, of course I am. So they hired Emma Sams, and that season of the massacre in Moldavia on Dynasty, cliffhangers had become the thing for episodic television for many reasons. One was they were expecting huge ratings, which we got. We were second only to the Super Bowl that year, 50-something million people in a 44 share, which is, you mention that today, and it's just insanity.
I was cast in the Colbys, but we were going to be spun off from Dynasty.
But there was a lot of tension on the set because John was not in favor of diluting the brand of Dynasty.
My daughter, Fallon, the one I told you about, she was like a gypsy.
They were right in knowing that a lot of financial assets would be transferred out of Dynasty into creating this new entity, the Colbys, just by the virtue of the cast.
My little sandwich, which was me in between Charlton Heston and Barbara Stanwyck, with Catherine Ross as my sister. What?
Michael Parks, Maxwell Caulfield.
I was the guy lucky enough to do the most number of Dynasty shows prior to jumping into the Colbys of California, as it was originally titled.
You feeling better?
Much.
My wife, who had actually popped up in a single episode, Juliet Mills, had been in Dynasty ahead of me, and she was a dear friend. It shows you it's all about who you know in this racket, of Douglas S. Kramer, Douglas Schoolfield Kramer, who was a big aficionado of the theater and a modern art collector. And so she thought he might respond to seeing me in the Buff downtown at the New York Shakespeare Festival, the Public Theater, in a play called Salonika, starring Jessica Tandy and Elizabeth Wilson. So it was a very high-class affair, but it did call for me to wear not a lot of clothing. In fact, no clothing for the beginning and end of the show. And Doug seemed to take the bait, took us out to dinner that night, and took us to a wonderful Manhattan speakeasy, and proceeded to offer me a chance to jump into the spin-off of Dynasty. And I was a little gun-shy of being in sequels, and also was currently starring opposite the great luminous Jessica Tandy, so I was a little dismissive of the initial offer, and I went, carried on the engagement in New York, and then at the end of it, I went back to Los Angeles, where I lived with Juliet, and was immediately on the hunt for work again, and asked my agent what had happened to Dynasty 2. He said, actually, there's a breakdown out on a character currently called Maxwell Colby. The breakdown said Maxwell Colby. I guess I was like the prototype for the character. And I thought, they still want me for the part. Well, tell them I'm interested. Tell them I'll come in and meet. And they said, well, actually, Max, they are interested, but you're going to have to do more than meet now. You're going to have to come in and do a screen test. And I don't know whether Doug had greased the wheels for that, but I did win the day and got to join a very illustrious cast. They then rechristened him Miles Colby when I got the role. I'm not sure if I objected to playing it Maxwell on and off, just because you're kind of a puppet in these shows, and then the line gets blurred too much in the public's mind. But anyway, I loved the name Miles Colby, and it was MC, which were my initials, which were the initials of the character I'd played in Grease 2, Michael Carrington, so it all seemed to fit.
We were going to a party in Denver, so we were starting on the set of Dynasty. And I can remember very clearly, my first scene was with Linda Evans. What a dear. And I said, Linda, can I come on the right-hand side of you because I'm deaf? And she said, yeah, sure. And then it was that I was told to drink champagne. And I said, could you serve me from that side because my left hand shakes? I just thought, I'm going to have to demand everything I need to make myself okay. If I start taking champagne with my left hand, it's going to be like that. And if Linda's on this side, I'll be going, sorry, what? So I just thought, take this, grab it, eat it, and let them make of you what they do.
Stephanie Beacham, of course, who got cast in the fabulously juicy role of Sable.
I always thought you were a slut. I never thought you'd prove it.
When I found out who Sable was, she was someone who cared deeply about her family and would go to any lengths to protect and give them advantage in life. Now, at first, they were thinking, the scriptwriters were thinking that I would have to do physically naughty things, like I loosened the girth on Barbara Mrs. Saddle. But after about an episode, they realized that I could do it all with my tongue and my mind, and then the heaven began.
No, the truth is, my sister, your mistress, is a tramp.
Richard and Esther Shapiro were really conceptual writers. They hired head writers. They wanted to outdo Dynasty. We shot at the Hilton Estate in Beverly Hills, and we had a whole different look, a whole different feel, very glitzy feel. Dynasty would have nice cars, but again, it's all about money. And they asked me, Jeff, would you like to drive a Lamborghini in the show? I said, are you kidding? And I had this beautiful Lamborghini. Of course, Maxwell Caulfield had a Ferrari.
I don't think I ever got into any car that wasn't, as hot red as Miles's temperament.
Writing was similar in style, but they attempted to create a dynasty without having to say dynasty. That's with the Barbara Stanwyck character, of course.
The Shapiros really did come up with a great conflict essentially between Blake Carrington and Jason Colby, as played by the late great Charlton Heston.
I want my oil shipped when it's pumped.
I'm pumping that oil, Jason, and you better ship it. You know, and it was always a rush to go into anytime I had a scene in Charlton Heston's office, to go into that huge, expansive office of his with the Remingtons and the port, you know, all the old Western art, and then sit down with Ben-Hur himself. It was I was never intimidated by it, but I certainly was stimulated by it.
You struck out, didn't you? Somebody slipped in there and beat you to it. How's it feel, not getting what you want?
Watch it, Miles.
I got to return to the Paramount lot, which was the scene of the earlier crime, the sequel to Grease. And I was my second shot, my second bite of the cherry, and I enjoyed rolling through those gates and going to my dog kennel of a trailer. The big stars had, you know, the monster motorhomes. And Tracy Scoggins and I, who played the twins, had like these little kennels on wheels. If you moved too fast, literally the whole thing tipped like a teeter-totter.
We were shooting at Paramount on the lot. Huge set. Over-the-top set. I mean, it was like you walked into this set and it was, my word. And Doug Kramer had a thing about flowers, and they had to be real and fresh and gigantic bouquets and real caviar.
Barbara Stanwyck said to me, Missy said to me, "Don't eat the caviar." And I said, "Why?" She said, "It'll get in your teeth." You know, but we had caviar. You can have it if you wanted it.
No twinges of the heart when you see her with Jason.
Now, shall I use the... no, not plain diamonds. I think, where are the sapphires? Are they a fourth drawer down? No, maybe the rubies. No, I don't want rubies. I don't want to wear that lipstick. Heaven.
And the money was just being poured into the show. And this was their big gun.
It was wonderfully extravagant.
My agent called me and said, "I have good news and I have bad news." I said, "Let me have the good news." He said, "You have star billing. It's the Colbys starring John James." "That's darn good." I said, "What could be bad?" He said, "Well, they're rolling your salary back 2 years." I said, "What?" They said, "Well, it was supposed to start 2 years ago, so really you should be making that much, not this much." They said, "Live by your contract. You have a contract, live by it." And I said, "Well, what do you think?" I said, my agent said, "Well, you have star billing." I said, "Yes, but I'm leaving the #1 rated show in the country and all over the world for a risky thing." He said, "Yeah, but it's your show and it may be a hit." I said, "Okay, tell him I'll live by my contract." A week later, I get a call from William Morris. "We have big problems." I said, "We have big problems?" I said, "What's the big problem?" "They just signed Charlton Heston." I said, "Why is that a problem?" "They have 2 signed contracts with star billing." I said, "Will you tell Aaron to live by his contract?" He said, "You're kidding." I said, "No, it's going to be the Colbys starring John James, down on the bottom right, with Charlton Heston." True story. Aaron Spelling called my agent, and his words were, "How hard are you going to squeeze?" And I told my agent, "Look, I don't want a penny more than I'm making on Dynasty. Just pay me what I should have been making this year on Dynasty." And I think because of that, Aaron, after the Colbys finished, invited me back on Dynasty, basically to answer the phone for the next 2 years. I got the money.